The Biden administration says it may have a new legislative approach in terms of dealing with climate change. Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. The Biden White House says it has a package of clean energy strategies that it believes could reach the similar gas emissions reduction as some of the proposals that were quashed by centrist Democrats, including West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. So what is in the details of all of this? Joining us now is Thomas Meyer. He's the National Organizing Manager for Food and Water Watch. Thomas, if I have this correct, the previous Democratic proposal really sort of focused on the power providers and trying to get them to stop burning coal and that sort of thing. It seems like this new proposal is a group of incentives aimed at the agricultural and industrial users of power. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, so the proposal is, still coming together. Obviously, I think the bottom line though is that it's pretty clear that Joe Manchin and other fossil fuel supporters in Congress are not going to allow policies that would get at the root of the climate crisis and actually keep fossil fuels in the ground and protect communities from the harms of fossil fuels and climate change itself.
But is it possible, I guess, I mean, instead of punishing, coal-fired power plants, is it possible to, it sounds like the Biden White House strategy is to essentially starve them, to say, okay, if you are using electricity or power from a coal-powered plant, we're gonna try to give you, the agricultural sectors, businesses, incentives to use alternative kinds of power, and we sort of leave the coal companies alone in the hopes that the market then causes these coal-powered plants to be squeezed.
It remains to be seen again exactly what the policies and the package are going to be. What we've seen so far, though, from Joe Manchin especially, is his support for what we would call really fossil fuel industry schemes to keep themselves afloat and alive. So there's a top line number going around of $500 or $600 billion for quote unquote climate policies in the package. It looks like a big chunk of that is actually going to be to subsidize things like carbon capture and sequestration, blue hydrogen, other schemes that rely on fracked gas and other fossil fuels as a foundation, rather than actually phasing out those fuel sources in a responsible way.
Is it possible to get the gas emissions reduction goals that everybody wants without essentially shutting down coal and fossil fuel industries?
It isn't, and that's, that needs to be done, like I said, in a responsible way. And I think the climate justice movement has been very clear that calls to end fossil fuels overnight, to shut down industry overnight, is not what anyone is demanding or expecting. Rather, we need a responsible managed decline of fossil fuel production and use in a way that takes care of communities that have been impacted and workers that are part of the industry, but not something that is essentially bailing out the corporate executives and allowing them to continue to extract fossil fuels, pollute communities, and drive the climate crisis. But it's been very clear from the UN, the International Energy Agency, 99.9% of the world's climate scientists that no, we cannot meet the very, very urgent demands of the climate crisis without keeping fossil fuels in the ground and making that transition now very, very quickly. We've left ourselves very little time.
Putting aside the political pragmatic realities that exist right now, what would be your ideal solution, the ideal legislation, assuming you could wave a magic wand, get 60 votes for whatever you wanted? What would be your ideal piece of legislation from the Biden White House to deal with this?
So in terms of actions that the Biden administration could take, Food and Water Watch is a part of a coalition called Build Back Fossil Free that actually has a blueprint of 25 executive actions that President Biden could take. And all of those could be paired with legislative proposals as well. But the bottom line is we, as the United States, as the historically the largest emitter and driver of the climate crisis, have a unique responsibility. And President Biden has unique authorities under existing law to jumpstart this transition. He can direct federal agencies to reject new permits and proposals for fossil fuel projects. It's insanity to be considering any new fossil fuel pipelines, crude oil or frac gas export terminals, drilling, mining, etc. Anything new is absolute madness. He can direct his federal agencies to reject anything new in terms of fossil fuel infrastructure projects. He can also declare a climate emergency, a national emergency, and unlock some specific powers. Everything from reinstating the crude oil export ban that Congress lifted back in 2015 to jumpstarting and investing huge amounts of money from the existing federal budget into a just transition into rapid renewable energy construction and development and deployment across the country. So again, we've got a long list of executive actions he can take that can be paired with, obviously, the financing that Congress has the unique responsibility to handle.
In your estimation, what is keeping Joe Biden, President Biden, from these executive actions?
I think there seems to be a sort of personal preference for bipartisan legislating that probably stems to his days in the Senate. That is, I think, an approach that is a product of a bygone era. Clearly, consensus across the aisle around something like climate change, where the entire scientific community, the entire world has consensus on this issue, and yet there's not, 50 votes in the Senate for even the most basic, rudimentary, or watered down climate policies. Biden's living in a different era. To think that he's going to be able to get something through Congress. I think there's also clearly, political calculations, and I've worked on a lot of campaigns taking on the fossil fuel industry, and it's always a battle over who's got more political power. And clearly, the fossil fuel industry and its other sort of supportive entities have a lot of political power to throw around. We heard that Joe Biden gets on weekly calls with Exxon lobbyists, and Biden is appealing to a certain constituency, whether it's the industry themselves or the people that he thinks supports the industry, in sort of holding back or watering down his climate proposals. But
President Biden has talked about wanting to have some sort of climate legislation and have the votes for it before he goes overseas. Is it possible for the United States, with a more watered down version like what it seems like the Biden White House is talking about, to go overseas and say, okay, the United States is somehow back as a leader in climate change because we're about to pass something rather than nothing?
I don't think it is. They'll give it their best shot, I'm sure. And the UN climate negotiations you mentioned start this weekend and continue for the next 2 weeks. So there's that window essentially of the next 2.5 weeks, maybe to get something through Congress. But I think those of us in the climate justice movement, and certainly other world leaders, would have a hard time looking at what's on the table. Again, coming from the historically the largest emitter, the biggest contributor to the climate crisis, and thinking that represents meaningful leadership. What we are calling on Biden to do is actually use the authority that he has right now and say, look, yes, we need to do things through Congress. We need to get some, more comprehensive federal proposals passed and into law. But before I go and send my administration to Glasgow to these UN climate talks, I'm going to take executive action and use the power that I have, again, to stop fossil fuel projects, to declare a climate emergency, to jumpstart the just transition to renewable energy. He can do that today. He's got, with the stroke of a pen in the Oval Office, he can take those action, and that would show serious leadership. And really put, I think, other world leaders in a position to follow that, rather than following the sort of partisan obstructionism and bickering that everyone's watching right now.
And a lot of us have been watching the news lately, and it seems like there are reports now every week about scientists saying that climate change is even worse than we had imagined, that there are more billion-dollar catastrophes happening at a faster pace. And so we're already paying for the change in climate and what it's doing to our weather systems. But it's striking to so many of us that none of that seems to have changed either the minds of or the urgency of the Biden White House or diminish the power of the fossil fuel industry?
Yeah, well, it's certainly up the ambition and the urgency of the climate movement, and I would point to the decisions by New York's new governor, Kathy Hochul, this morning, rejecting plans for 2 new frack gas power plants in the lead up to this COP as exactly the kind of climate action that other governors, the president, other executives can take around the country to say enough is enough. These plans, they actually said in their rejection of the permits, these plans are inconsistent with the climate goals and the climate pledges that New York State has made. President Biden and other world leaders need to follow that lead and take those kinds of actions.
Thomas Meyer, National Organizing Manager of Food and Water Watch. Thomas, good of you to join us on this topic. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.